The 26th of the 9th, 2024, and there is more fallout from the facade, the madness that is Danny Ric being sacked from RB Visa Cash App, because there have been contrasting reports. 99% of the F1 world came out and were very complimentary. Lest we forget that this dude has 17 fastest laps, 8 wins, 3 poles, 32 podiums, 258 Grand Prix raced in total, and a grand total of 1,329 points. Ergo, put some respect on Daniel Ric's name. Why? Because in addition to that, when he first came onto the scene 10 years ago, he was nailing, destroying, for want of a better word, one Sebastian Vettel, finger boy. At that time, the next one, heir apparent to the Michael Schumacher throne, 4-time champion. What do you mean? 2010 to 2013, nobody couldn't beat that dude. Sebastian Vettel, aka Finger Boy, became famous for lights the flag victories. Again, last ditch qualifying laps, the likes of which we hadn't seen since Ayrton Senna. He was a god tier one. And if you're doing F1 maths, that means therefore that Danny Ric too was a god tier one. So easily was he able to dispatch one Sebastian Vettel. But more than that, more than his merits and his not insubstantial feats behind the wheel of an F1 car, it was his person. It was the smile, the cheeky wink, the sense of humour, the way in which he was able to endear himself to millions and millions of fans around the world, not least in Netflix's Drive to Survive, much to the contentment of Liberty Media, who thrived and survived on the back of the Netflix series, didn't they? And Danny Ric is in no small part to thank for that. And on the back of the official announcement today, again, the biggest or the worst kept secret in F1 history, that Danny Ric will be superseded by one Liam Lawson as soon as the Dakota Grand Prix next time out. The world reacted with regret, ruining what could have been for the career that was Danny Ric. He reacted saying, "I've loved this sport my whole life. It's wild and wonderful, and it's been a journey. To the teams and individuals that played a part, thank you. To the fans who love the sport sometimes more than they do me, lol out loud, thank you. It'll always have its highs and its lows, but it's been fun, and the truth be told, I wouldn't change it for the world until the next adventure." Oh, the humanity. This dude pulls up my heartstrings each and every single time. It's a shame, not least because it's a shame that the way that he's been treated by the bulls that are red, by the house that Christian Horner built. I thought once upon a time that Christian Horner would never get rid of Danny Ric, that indeed Danny Ric was to Christian Horner an adopted son, just like Christian Horner is to the Tayuvidra family, the 51% owners of Red Bull GmbH. But no, Christian Horner ultimately pulled the trigger in not dissimilar way that he should have pulled the trigger on the materially underperforming one they call the Mexican Minister of Defense. Christian Horner responded not in dissimilar fashion, recounting Danny Ric's tenure in Formula One with fondness, saying as follows: "From the moment you arrived at Red Bull, it was obvious that you were so much more than a driver." Yes, Christian Horner, because he was a mainstream superstar. That's why. Man that can break USA. And again, Red Bull would be wise to hold on to Danny Ric in some capacity, but we'll get onto that. "Your constant enthusiasm," continues Horner, "sense of humour and attitude will leave an indelible legacy on the team here in Milton Keynes, as will F1 on a whole. Thanks for the wins, the smiles, the songs, and I wish I could say the shoeies. You will always be a special part of the Red Bull family. You're damn straight you will, Christian Horner. 8 podiums, 32 wins, 1,329 points. These statistics and accolades are not the only measure of who you are and what you have achieved. Thank you, Daniel." Nice touch from Christian Horner. Do you know what I mean? I don't hate that, Daniel. Hope. Don't hate that, though. Christian Horner will always be a polemic figure, true or false, chat. And again, the rest of the F1 world and grid responded in not dissimilar fashion. Pierre Gasly had this to say: "Congrats for what you achieved, champ. Put some respect on Daniel Ricciardo's name. What do you mean?" George Russell had this to say: "Gonna miss you, mate." David Coulthard, former legend of the grid, said, "You've left an impressive legacy behind you in the sport and always made the paddock a smilier place. The paddock, for want of a better turn of phrase, will be worse off for the absence of the honey badger." A cheeky wink and a smile. It was more than F1. Why? Because Danny Ric was a human first, was he not? Maximilian Verstappen had this to say: "Head up, mate. Many more beautiful moments to come." Bravo, Maximilian Verstappen. Lando says, "Love you, brother." All sentimental and nostalgia settings, isn't it? You do well to read this and not well up, not becoming an emotional wreck. Again, ruining the fact that we've lost one of the special ones, especially as far as his human emotions. Him just being a man, a good man. Mercedes AMG F1 on social media had this to say: "You've been an incredible competitor over the years. Thanks for the many fun battles and the infectious energy you brought to our sport, both on and off the track. Enchante, Daniel. Let's go." I don't hate any one of those, and it does fill it makes my heart warm. The F1 have been as competitive and ruthless and sneaky and skullduggerous. I mean, these are the things that epitomise, no, characterise. Those are the sort of signifiers you've got to reach for if you're going to summarise what it is to be in Formula One. But every once in a while, something happens and these guys can bond together and express some emotions. However, in stark contrast, there is one man associated with the grid still, yet and still, as Red Bull GmbH consultant, who doesn't sing from that hymn sheet when he's talking about Danny Ric. Gives it to you raw and uncut. All of the sentimentality around Danny Ric's leaving be damned. That chap has a name, and his name is Dr. Helmut Marko. Because here's what he had to say: "I think the decision to leave Red Bull Racing from Danny Ric was a turning point in his career. Then he didn't have a winning car at either Renault or McLaren. He did, of course, win at Monza, but those were special circumstances. No longer was Danny Ric's career going to be one of success, not at least the success and the frequency of race wins that he had at Red Bull Racing." Helmut Marko continues: "I don't know what exactly happened, because if we knew, we would have helped him, tried to solve for his not insubstantial ills behind the car, struggled with handling dynamic. No longer was he that geezer, last of the late breakers, super aggressive dive bombs up the inside." Marko continues: "But the speed and above all, this late braking, and then he goes left and then he goes right. In the last few years, he tried to do that, tried to recapture the glories of his prime. But," says Helmut Marko, "it was no longer there." And here's where we get techie. Cue the humanity horns. "The killer instinct," says Dr. Helmut Marko, "that was gone." Oh, the humanity. You know what I mean? Another dagger to my heart as a fan of the honey badger. But for the avoidance of doubt, Helmut Marko is right. Danny Ric has not been Danny Ric for years, and that's why ultimately Christian Horner had to make himself the same decision that he should have made around Checo Perez. Now you got to make a decision with meritocracy in mind, right? Why? Because ultimately you report to the owners of the business. Do you know what I mean? There are young, hungry lions like a Liam Lawson, like a Hadjar, just waiting in the wings, and Danny Ric's been given ample opportunity. Christian Horner, lest we forget, said Danny Ric over the past year or so has been less than stellar as far as his performances. Marko believes that concerns about receiving equal status alongside a burgeoning talent in Maximilian Verstappen and skepticism over Red Bull's partnership with Honda prompted Danny Ric's exit. Do you want to dig up some old bones, Helmut Marko, any? Do you know what I mean? Do you want to uncover some old wounds, any? But he doesn't pull any punches, does the fella? I mean, bloody Nora Pope. Helmut will be an advisor at 100 years old. Isn't he already 100 years old, Pope? I thought he was already well there. As it says, that's what I'm trying to say. Liam deserves it, yes, but Danny doesn't deserve the cold send off. We will get to that, mate, because I feel like it's been a bit techie as far as the way that they've handled it. In fact, let's address that now before I read out the rest of the Helmut Marko slander. The F1 community as a whole always had at front and centre Danny Rick's best endeavours. We want him to be the priority. Why? Because he made us laugh. He was a good guy. He always came across as the dude that you want to go down the publican with and have a drink with. So, of course, the F1 community are always going to be protective over Danny Rick and the way that he's treated. Red Bull, therefore, say many in the F1 community, didn't handle this exit as they should have. They didn't give him the grace nor the send-off that he deserved. It was all cloaks and daggers, secrecy settings. Did he know? Didn't he know? All the other drivers, including Yuki Tsunoda, Maximilian Verstappen, Lando, they were all talking about it. It was the worst kept secret at the Singapore Grand Prix weekend. Handle it better than that, Red Bull. Get your PR department. Give that dude the credit that he deserves. Look at those stats. 17 fastest laps, 8 wins, 3 poles. Do you know what I mean? Danny Rick's beloved up and down the grid, outside of F1, even mainstream superstar. Give him more than a guard of honour in the hospitality pen. Nonsense. Not Helmut Marko, though. Helmut Marko, sentiment aren't waters that Helmut Marko frequents very often. He continues. He had certain reservations about Honda engine, apparently listened more to the sweet talk of Renault and Cyril What's-His-Face, Helmut Marko explained. Financially, though, and this is where it gets tested. I did not know this. This is news to me. If Helmut Marko is to be taken at face value, then this is chaos. Financially, says Helmut Marko, there wasn't that much difference between what Renault offered him and what we as Red Bull Racing offered him. Oh, the humanity. And this, ladies and gents, is where it gets chaotic. And by the way, you know what, before I get on to Helmut Marko's final stanza, his parting shots, let me say this. All of these, I know, love Danny Rick doesn't necessarily need to translate to the chap who's succeeding him as hatred, social abuse or abuse online, social media. These toxic worries, these internet bots. Leave Liam Lawson alone. You can't blame him for the way that Red Bull has treated Daniel Ricciardo. These two things are different entities. Can't conflate issues, for Pete's sake. But again, the F1 community's going to do what it does best, is it not? And that I find upsetting. Helmut Marko says, I told him that shoeies on the podium, that they would be hard for you to get when you go across to Renault. He came to us beating Vettel with 3-0 victories in the 2014 season. And after that, Danny Kvyat was faster than him at times, but over the season, he also had him under control. And then Max came and he got stronger and stronger. So that was certainly one of the reasons for his decision to choose Renault over us. The timing, though, was related to a variety of different factors and obligations. He said he was informed and worthy, here we go. See Helmut Marko getting techie and controversial, Jorge. What's going on here? The timing, Helmut Marko says, was related to a variety of different factors and obligations. He was informed, and the worthy farewell performance was, I think, the fastest. Like, that's all that you're going to give him, Helmut. That's what you're going to give Danny Rick. That dude, the dude that put Drive to Survive on his back and took F1 to the mountaintop, back to the peaks of mainstream popularity. That's what you're going to give him. A bloody a guard of honour at the hospital. This is nonsense. Again, not good. Poor form as far as Red Bull Racing. But again, as far as sacking drivers, hiring and firing, they've never hesitated, right? I don't care. Apart from when it's Checo Perez and there's $30 million at stake as far as the sponsorship money that he brings in and all the energy drinks and merch that he sells all around the world. But I digress. Marko continues. That still showed the fastest lap, still showed what potential he has, not continuously and not at that level. But that would not have justified him coming back to Red Bull Racing, superseding Checo Perez. But that was an impeccable performance, was his fastest lap, being able to just tap into it like that. However, he was on low fuel, but I digress. I think that it was clearly communicated to Helmut Marko that there is to be significantly better than Yuki Tsunoda, and he only managed that in a few races. Again, we're talking about the objective. Lest we forget, Daniel Ricciardo came in there and said his sole goal and objective was to get back to the Red Bull parent team, the proper one, drive again alongside Maximilian Verstappen. Oh, the humanity. It was clear that this story, the prodigal son rejoining Red Bull Racing, says Helmut Marko, unfortunately didn't work out. He said very well that he's at peace with himself and that he has come to terms with the situation, and we will see what his plans for the future are. Oh, Pope, I can't cope with this useless fact Bernardi. It's too chaotic for me to read that stuff, but I'm struggling. Go on, and here's where it gets very techie. Because you know what? You know when somebody passes, you mourn them in a way that's graceful and befitting of the person, even if they were a tyrant when they were alive, right? Helmut Marko, sadly though, chap, has not got that memo. Here's what he had to say. Of Ricciardo, he says that him leaving for Renault was a broken promise to the now deceased Dietrich Mateschitz, way to SH1T on the legacy that is Danny Rick. Here's what Marko had to say. Techie, properly owe the humanity. What many people don't know is that when Danny Rick left Red Bull family at the end of 2018, says Dr. Helmut Marko, he left Top Bull, Top Dog, CEO Dietrich Mateschitz, RIP, with scorched earth, says the Motorsport Total article. At the end of June, during personal meetings with Helmut Marko in Graz and Mateschitz in Salzburg, Ricciardo confirmed before leaving for Renault with a handshake that he would extend his contract and drive for Red Bull Racing through to 2019. Oh, the humanity. Meaning, therefore, that Danny Rick broke a promise to the now deceased Dietrich Mateschitz, former CEO of Red Bull GmbH, CEO and founder in conjunction with Charlie Mavija. Oh, the humanity. You mean to tell me that the Honey Badger, the man who I love, man who I look up to, the man who you'd hold out as a bastion of what it is to be a human being, a lovely man, a humanitarian, that this dude shook Dietrich Mateschitz's hand and Helmut Marko and agreed that he was going to stand to Red Bull Racing through 2019 and then threw it back in their face. This is what you're saying, Dr. Helmut Marko. How very dare you poo-poo on the legacy of Danny Rick. I don't want to know this. I'm going to close my eyes and avert my gaze to this new information that I was not aware of. But then, per Helmut Marko's account, everything changed in the story of the long-haul flight to America, during which he made the decision to break his word, to go against the handshake with Dietrich Mateschitz and break his promise that he was going to drive for Red Bull and accept the offer from Renault, is well documented apparently. Marko remembers, quote, "It was an event on the main square in Graz, and afterwards we sat down together and actually came to an agreement. The agreement was sealed with a handshake. He then drove to Salzburg and did the very same thing there with Dietrich Mateschitz." I mean, like, what more do you say? What Danny Rick broke his word to Dietrich Mateschitz. I have no case. I would love to argue against that for Danny Rick. But if that's the truth, if we're taking that on face value, for Danny Rick, it's not a good look. For all the humanitarianism, for all the smile, the winks, for all the endearing character and the warm personality, for being a light on the grid, that he shook the hand of Dietrich Mateschitz, now deceased, legend of Red Bull, the man who set up the company in the first instance, all of those bloody wild bike rides and daring skating tournaments, that has come to epitomise, personify even what Red Bull are always pushing, fine margins, always trying to find more lap time. Again, remember when they first came into the sport at inception, everybody said they're just an energy drinks company, but the DNA of Dietrich Mateschitz runs through that team long after he's sadly deceased. Now we get the news that Daniel Ricciardo shook his hand and said that he would continue to drive at Red Bull, that he gave him his word only to get on the plane and do a massive U-turn and sign away his contract and his career to one Renault. It doesn't sit well, I'm going to be honest, and it's in stark contrast, fundamentally, diametrically opposed even, to the guy that we've come to know and love, the guy that lit up Netflix's Drive to Survive. But you know what? This is F1 and it's a piranha's tank, and sometimes you've got to make decisions for yourself. Danny Rick did it, and unfortunately for him, the legend that is, it didn't work out. How, ladies and gents, do you like your F1?